Hello and welcome to our webinar. I'm Shirley Macmillan, one of the Dairy Knowledge Exchange Managers, and today we're going to be looking at how to cut feed costs through making better forage. And we're doing this today by talking to our strategic dairy farmer from Sussex, Dan Burdett. Dan runs an organic herd, so he's got the double whammy of escalating feed prices and trying to source organic feed. He also doesn't have the problem with fertiliser prices because he has to rely on slurry, so it's about making best use of farm inputs. And we're also joined by independent consultant Dr. George Fisher, whose expertise in soils, fertiliser and muck has been put to use on Dan's farm. And we've also been taking a look at lean management as a way to reduce waste and make best use of our assets and hopefully save some money. So first of all, I've got a bit of housekeeping to do. We'll be covering these topics as I mentioned, and we've muted all attendees. That's just so that we don't get any background noise, dogs barking and things. We'll be finishing promptly at 1 o'clock. This webinar is being recorded and we will send you a link to the recording as well as email you some of our resources on soils and forage. And we do appreciate it if you could take some time to complete the survey afterwards. It does help us to improve these webinars as we're going along. We do encourage you to ask questions as we're going along. Nobody else will be able to see them, just myself. So you can do it anonymously. It's great. Please click on the arrow on this orange box to the right of your screen. It gets your control panel, and then click on this white arrow beside the word questions, and you can type your question in there. Please keep it relevant to the topic of the day, the forage and the concentrates and the fertiliser. Good. So Dan, I'd like to just get you to introduce Cockhays to everybody, just to put it as in the picture there. And we start with the easy things, the vital statistics, your autumn block calving. And you also are organic, so just tell us when you're calving and then we'll move into cow numbers.
Okay, thanks Shirley. So yeah, so we calve, we start about the 20th of August. We'll have about 95% calved by week 6, about the 10th of October or thereabouts.
Yeah, okay. And cow numbers and heifers this year?
Aiming for 240 cows. We're having a bit of a herd clear out this year. We've got cheese production starting on site, so we need to sort our cell count out. So we've got about 70 heifers calving in this year, and we'll be done hopefully by October.
Okay, yeah. In terms of hectares, what have you got?
So we farm about 300 hectares. Around half of that we own. Half of that is on either a great annual grazing or cropping license, and some of that is also on a contract farming agreement with a local landowner.
Okay, and we are going to move on to logistics, but just tell us how many different sites you might have your land on.
The main farm is next door to the farm that we have the grazing license with, so that's all okay. But we've got another 150 acres, which is predominantly silage ground, which is about 3 miles from the farm.
Okay then, and in terms of the grazing platform specifically, how big is that?
I always struggle with this because it's kind of flexy, really. I guess we would graze about 250 hectares of that on the shoulders of the season, beginning of the year. So we'd start grazing late January, February time. We'll graze the entire farm, or the entire, sorry, not the 300 hectares, about 150 hectares that we own. But then, yeah, the platform itself, I guess, when you shrink it down to about 80 or 90 hectares through the grazing season predominantly.
Okay, and just give us a rundown on what's in your different swards. Have you got a difference between the grazing platform and the silage?
Yeah, the grazing platform, we started growing herbal lays in 2014. I guess 3/4, I suppose, of the grazing platform will be in herbal lays now. And so that's good. That works really well for us. I guess when I talk about some of our figures later on, you have to give it a bit of a pinch of salt because of measuring those lays. And then in the silage swards, we have, up until this year, we've been putting in Coxfoot and Timothy and plantain in there just to try and create a bit more diversity. But obviously we're trying to aim for quality cutting as well as soil health.
And also, just to touch on your regen ag ideas, you've got trees. Where have you put the trees?
Well, that photo you've got there in the kind of upper left from the farm houses, and there's a paddock there that's now got trees in it, and as has the paddock next to that. So we've got about 5 acres of trees, so in 10 by 10 grids. So the cows still graze those fields with guards around the trees. And
I believe you've put fruit and nut trees in?
Yeah, and mixed native, so some for timber, some for shade and shelter, some for potentially food production.
Yeah, it sounds good. Okay. So I suppose the thing we've come here for is, what's the challenge for you? Now, in terms of your milking platform, rotational paddock grazing, I understand you do really well down in Sussex despite the dry. So could you just tell everybody how much you can produce and how you know that?
Yeah, we use Agronet like most dairy farmers now, measuring the grass. We have the potential, like last year we grew, well, it said we grew an average of 13.5 tonne. And that is on paddocks that we're measuring more than 20 times. So there's some paddocks that I wouldn't include in there that we shut up for dry cow feed or that were reseeded, etc. So we have the potential in a year when it rains. So it's raining quite a lot at the moment. We've been growing at about 100 or so a week for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So the grazing platform, we can grow quite a lot of grass on. But as I said earlier, a lot of that, we're looking at measuring herbal lays. And actually, when we were measuring yesterday, the figures are quite high, and there's quite a lot of stem coming in. So it probably skews the figures slightly. After this round, we'll probably reset anything with a topper or something just to make sure we've got more leaf. But we've certainly grown that amount in probably 6 out of the last 10 years. The other 4 years we grew probably half that, and that was when it didn't rain.
That's really good. The difficulty is with this rising plate meter, which measures the density of the foliage that's out there. So it's perhaps a development when we start using other technology like drones and satellites. It may be able to help with the herbal lays and grazing. But well, that's what you do.
Just to pick you up on that, we did do trials last year with satellite, but they didn't want to measure the fields with herbs in. So we're a long way from that, Shirley.
Okay, right. It's a challenge out there for somebody who can do that for us, because if we're all putting herbal lays in for good reasons, we need to be able to still measure them to manage them. Now, moving on to your challenges, actually, I think the first thing is, can you tell us what concentrates are going to cost you?
Well, we actually, 2 days ago, did for the first time have some firm prices come through to me, and I think we're looking at between 650 and 700 pounds a tonne for food this winter, which is eye-watering. We seem to have entered a new paradigm in feed costs, something I've been fearful of probably for a few years. So yeah, when you put the milk price ratio, feed price ratio together, it's not very pretty, Shirley.
And what kind of concentrate are you feeding? Is it a pellet or is it a blend?
That's a pellet. We'd be feeding probably around 20% concentrate through the winter, 18% leading into that, and 18 to 16% coming out the other side. We also feed Lucerne Pellets, but we're having a bit of a rough ride with that at the moment, potentially like real palatability issues. Cows don't want to eat it. I don't know whether that's where we've sourced them from, but and we have to feed more of that to get the same results as the concentrate. So that's been a challenge for us.
Okay, and in terms of milk from forage, what's the current situation for you on that one?
I would say it says 3,500 litres there. I mean, we're doing about 5,800 litres per cow, which is not enough. And probably about half of that, I would suggest, comes from forage, probably 3,000 litres, so just over half. comes from forage.
And that's something you think you'd like to improve?
Well, yeah, we have to going forwards, but I think it's really about economic yield going forward for us. You know, this winter we will probably cut back on concentrate quite heavily after we've got cows in calf, just because economically it doesn't work. And so I guess as a result, our milk from forage will go up a bit because we're feeding less, but that does depend on the success of George's advice and the quality of our silage.
Because that's the thing that we're going on to, isn't it? Your cows will only produce more milk from forage if you give them something they want to eat. So how do you get on with silage quality?
Yeah, I mean, I like to tinker around with things. Last year we tried making oats and vetch silage, cut it as a sort of, I don't know, halfway between an arable silage and a whole crop, and it made awful silage. So that was very unpopular with the cows. So that was a lesson learned for that. Yeah, on the whole, it's palatable. You know, we don't waste too much, but it's, you know, the quality is okay, but it's never great. And on a kind of low yielding simple system, we need that silage to be better.
And the other complication we've got is self-feed.
Well, some would say that it's not a complication at all. It makes life very easy, but yeah, we're obviously, you know, we've got a yield ceiling, I suppose, because we're feeding predominantly grass silage and self-feed, so the cows are having to do the work.
Yeah, and there is a sort of standard of how much height in the clamp that you can have for optimum intake. And
Yeah,
can you?
yeah, it wants to be like 2 meters tall max, really. With our clamps, if I fill it at 2 meters, it may not always be enough for the winter, and if we have an excess, I'm not going to turn that down, so I will put more in. So we'll build it higher, and we then have to use a shear grab, unfortunately, which does increase our, you know, the cost of doing the job.
Yeah. Okay. And also, if the cows are choosing themselves, they do want to be choosing something they want to eat rather than nosing in a trough, aren't they? Okay. And the other thing that's a complication for you is you're organic, so you have to make use of your muck and slurry. But
Yeah.
you've come across issues with that in recent years. Just tell us a bit more about that.
So we have a straw-based cubicle system. So our lagoon has a weeping wall, so it takes all the water out. So we end up with a kind of 8-foot crust on it. So it's very akin. This year when we pulled it out, it's like FYM. We stacked it in the field and it's bone dry. We've had a very dry winter, particularly. And if we spread that on grassland, it tends to just sit and stay there. It doesn't tend to break down very quick through the summer. With the weather the way it is at the moment, I guess we'll have a better chance of some of that washing in inverted commas. But yeah, I guess it's a good muck for, you know, arable and incorporating into soils. But so our challenge really is to turn that into a product that can benefit our grassland rather than being sort of an impediment to improve silage quality.
And when you've moved to doing more of a multi-cut system, taking leafier crops in a shorter time frame, then that becomes a bit of a problem, doesn't it, when the muck isn't going down into the soil?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken 4 cuts a year probably for the last 5 or 6 years. So we're cutting early May and every 6 to 7 weeks, depending on the weather, really. If it's very dry, then it's going to be longer. But yeah, if we put that muck out, even if we put it out straight after the forage has gone, its likelihood is that it's still going to be something there in the base of the swards. And then we have had issues in the past where, you know, we can get potential for contamination. We've had to use groupers and things like that. So I'm really wary of putting too much out. We really only tickle it out, and actually trying to put it on towards the end of the season so it has time to break down. But obviously new rules and regulations are going to make that a challenge for us going forward.
Definitely. One nice thing, and I've put it at the bottom in green, is that you said you want to understand your soils better. Give us an idea of what you mean there.
Well, as an organic farmer, it's our soils that drive everything. And I know, you know, it's all there for us. I think it's just unlocking it. Like the nutrients are there, it's whether they're available. So when we do soil tests, that's what's available. It's not actually what's there. It's all there for us. So the herbal ley is the reason for that, is to create a better microbial diversity in the soil, and that will help to unlock that. The trees, for similar reasons, that's what they're for. But on the silage ground, where we don't graze so much, have less herbs, less diversity, that's really where the challenge is, and understanding, what we're taking quite a lot off. We have quite low potash on a lot of our fields. So how do we kind of unlock that from the soils, would be our main challenge going forward.
That's good. We've got some questions come in then. So have you considered whole crop with the option to combine it, such as peas and barley?
So we do a whole crop every year. I mean, I did go through a couple of years of just grass because I like growing grass. But yeah, so we've got 40 acres of winter wheat, which will whole crop, and we've got 20 acres of barley and vetch. Peas, yeah, it's a bit like undersowing here. Like we've undersown this year, it quite often doesn't work. Peas we've struggled with in the past. On both farms that we run, we have quite a lot of deer, and I don't want to lose excuse me, the crops to that. So we use vetch instead, to try and get the protein into the crops. Yeah.
And have you thought about lupins?
My dad's tried growing lupins. I mean, I think one of our kind of, I guess one of the strategies going forward is that we would try and produce more homegrown protein, so i.e. beans, lupins, cereals to combine. It's a challenge organically growing these crops as a dairy farmer. We don't have all the tools. We don't have that many contractors around here with the right tools to kind of help us. So
Okay.
They can be quite dirty crops, which leads to further problems down the line. So we need to go back and investigate that, but it's on the table, yeah, for sure.
And how do you manage phosphate levels in your soil?
I'll be honest and say I don't really manage it. I don't know what, when you say manage it, I'm not sure what that means.
Possibly getting too much?
Yeah, there could be. Yeah, certainly on the grazing platform. I guess we use the dirty water on the grazing platform, and that they tend to be, certainly in the index of 3, most of the grazing platform would be that, and probably a lot of the silage grounds. I'm looking at the silage analysis, so that is an issue. If we keep on putting on more and more muck, we're going to have more and more of those issues. So that's why, looking at composting it, as we'll talk about in a bit. We hope to manage it that way.
Yeah, that's good. We'll get George's thoughts on that when we move on. So I am just going to try and show a very short little film clip. It's panning the self-feed silage clamp. This was when George and I went to visit Dan. If it is a bit slow, it could just be if you have not such great broadband at home. So tell us, Dan, what's in this pit here?
Well, can I first of all say this is the end of the season, and the cows hadn't eaten that for a month, so it doesn't always look like that before you put your hands up. So we have from right to left. We fill it sideways, so we have first cut, second cut, some whole crop, and third and fourth cuts. So we fill it that way so that the cows have the same diet through the winter. So their diet it doesn't really change. It might change a bit if you get to different, a slightly different bit of grass, but essentially they're having the same thing all winter.
Okay, George, first impressions when you went to visit here?
Yeah, as Dan says, it's the end of the pit, so you have to take that into account. Impressions, first one was there's a huge variety of different types of forage in there. There's not a great deal of wastage on top or side, so compaction was pretty good. Some of the dry material was heating up, so there'd been some post-fermentation sort of yeast impact. And the overall impression then is that there's actually a lot of choice for cows going across that face, and a lot of different nutritional qualities, dry matters, to handle all at the same time. So really quite a complex situation.
Okay, we'll move on. I've got another clip here, which, okay, need to get on. Sorry, it's repeating itself. I think we have to go through it again. It's the keys on the computer and the operator.
You can actually see where the different cuts have been put, just to fill in as that's going through.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this one, we've got the dog in there for scale. This is your silage lays. Dan, what was in this field?
So that's there's some perennial ryegrass, and then there's cocksfoot, red and white clover, and some plantain. Although that's I think 4 years old, this lay, so that the plantain's starting to disappear from that.
George, what were your thoughts in this paddock?
Yeah, in this one it was pretty dry. We couldn't get a spade in, but there's a reasonable standing crop there. And as we'll see as we go through, there's why we say the clamp looks very variable. It's because we've got a large variation in different sward types and standing crops when we're coming to cutting time.
Okay, and this one is herbal silage lays. You can see that a bit clearly there, Dan. How long's this one been down?
Yeah, that's 4 years. I mean, we use that a lot for grazing. That gets cut. That bit we did cut that because it got too far in front of the calves. But generally, our ones grazing that and cutting occasionally.
George, what were your comments on this silage lay?
We were able to get a spade into this one and look at the soil. I would say that just anecdotally going across the different fields, the fields that had a higher variety of species in them, it was actually easier in these dry conditions when it was. These are the 28th of April now when we visited. The more diverse the swards were, the easier it was to actually get to look at the soil, which is an interesting observation of positivity with regard to the diversity that Dan is looking for. They tended to be holding more water and have a better structure.
There was a question here. How does Dan manage predominating species within herbal lays? We find that over a year or two we lose certain species, and that chicory can be a pain.
Well, yeah, chicory in the grazing lays, chicory is about 3 years and it starts to disappear. It can bolt when it gets dry, or in the summer it will bolt. So we have sometimes mechanically sort that out, or we just ignore it and leave it. In the cutting lays, we learned to not put chicory in there because it gets all stemmy. If you leave it for 6-7 weeks, it will turn into stem. So that's why plantain's in there. And plantain is much more resilient, and actually often it will disappear, but then it will come back at times. We find with plantain that in areas that have been heavily grazed, or should I say damaged during wet weather, we get lots of chicory, lots of plantain regrowing again. So I favour plantain over chicory for most of the time. Chicory works well for the first 2 or 3 years to start busting through pans and creating that diversity.
And a question on establishment, while you mentioned that, how are you establishing your herbal lays?
Yeah, so as we're organic, we have to plough still, unfortunately. And we've tried other things, but so we tend to plough in the spring or in the winter, put a winter crop in. So we put a winter crop in, we'll plough it, power harrow it, and put a crop in. And then last year we subsoiled and then had to cultivate and made a real hash of it. So this year I'm going to try and direct drill into that. I guess it's going to depend on how clean that stubble is, but I'm willing to try to do that to minimise more soil disturbance. The spring stuff we've undersown this year, I'll know in a month or so's time whether that's worked. The grass is coming up, but the spring, even at 50 kilos an acre, the barley is still swamping the grass, and so I don't know how low a seed rate we need to go on that to establish it properly. So Yeah, we still use the plough. I can't see any way around that, unfortunately, and we do see as a result, plough pans across the farm when we dig holes.
Okay. On self-feed silage, how often are you testing so that you know what the cows are actually eating?
We just test at the beginning of the year, so end of the summer, and that really is to try and formulate a ration, in inverted commas. I guess organic ingredients are so limited that actually there's so little we can change. Once the silage is in the pit and the concentrate is bought, that's it really. We can either up or we can put it up or we can bring it down. So yeah, we don't continually do it. I guess we'll find out through the bulk tank milk ticket.
We'll come on to your analysis in a short while. George is going to take us through that. And do you ever get problems with bloat and clover?
No, touch wood, we don't. Although Luke lost one to bloat on the other farm last week on a very predominantly red clover based lay, and he did everything right beforehand. But yeah, so at Cock Hayes, not for the last 11 years, we've not seen any bloat, to touch wood.
Okay, and this one is a nice action shot of your slurry and muck, which is difficult to make it look sexy, but actually this is really important stuff for you and for everybody else, because we have this and we need to use it as a resource. So just tell us a bit how your system works here.
Well, I think I explained earlier, you can see in the corner as it pans around, there's a weeping wall, so water comes out there. We're just building a new 6,000 or 7,000 cube lagoon. That water will go in there, so we'll store that all through the winter, and then we can irrigate that out in the summer. Currently that goes out through a Briggs. Very, very open as to whether that's ever going to be allowed again in the future, unfortunately. So yeah, we scrape out twice a day, lots of straw in there. So there's a lot of dry mats, a lot of carbon going in there. So it is kind of like FYM when it comes out.
Somebody has commented that they had trouble with straw in their weeping wall and they went to sawdust, which is fantastic and better. Is that something you've tried?
Well, we don't have trouble. It works really well. The water all comes out, and then we just get a 360 in and dig the lagoon out. I mean, it's a difficult one. My slurry costs, it costs me, I guess, maybe about max £10,000 a year to deal with my slurry at Cock Hayes. And on the sawdust-based system on the other farm, it costs me about 3 times that much to manage it, because of the use of umbilicals and tankers and what have you. So the issue is getting it when it's out in the field. It's actually, breaking it down.
That's good. We've got a good start there, George. Can we move to you? We'll just introduce this concept, I think, of lean management, and how might Dan apply it to his situation?
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. With regard to taking a sort of a lean mindset to any situation in manufacturing, it's really about eliminating or reducing waste and accentuating value, so that we're cutting costs to get the optimum quality and quantity of any part of the manufacturing process. So you can split any manufacturing into a set of processes. There's within dairy farming, then we've got the milking process, we've got a fertility process, an animal health and welfare process, and what we're talking about today is the forage making process. So the idea is to look at each process, identify the points of waste to address those, and make sure that we are minimizing costs to produce the right quantity and quality of material for the next part of the process. So the process after the forage making process is the feeding process. So the focus of what we're doing with Dan is to look at the forage making process, and to beg the question, where are the points of waste and how can we optimize the quality and quantity of forage going into the feeding process. That's basically where we're at with that.
Yeah, where was his point of waste then? What did you find?
Well, yeah, I think the largest set of challenges that we've got within Dan's situation with regard to the organic approach. So a part of the lean mindset is to look at the resources that we're dealing with, and obviously Dan's very interested in soils. His soils, mainly silty clay loams, some sandy clay loams, were actually in relatively very good nick, and so there's a positive there. In terms of the fertility in the soils, there's some issues around sulfur on the farm, I think, and some sulfur deficiency and some low potassiums. The phosphoruses, to go back to a previous question, are actually okay across the farm, but there are some low potassium. So from the point of view of optimizing forage production, there's a few soil issues and fertility issues there to sort out. From the point of view, we'll see in a minute, of the actual swards themselves, one of the causes of points of waste within the system that we've got with Dan is that we have a large variety of standing crop, and also a large variety in the different species we've got in the different crops going into the forage process. Now, that is a situation which, discussing with Dan, his approach to the organic way of producing milk, that is not going to change. Okay, so as Dan said earlier on, it's about minimizing the waste of energy and protein through that, and we've come up with a solution or a set of solutions which Dan can judge this winter when he gets there. And so really, about within Dan's process, we were focusing on how do we even out that quality across the forage making, from cutting all the way through to feeding. And a last part of that conversation was about additives, but we can come back to that.
Okay, what did you actually do, Dan, after our visit with those silage lays?
Well, we cut them on the 4th of May. It's probably the earliest cut we've done, although albeit by about a day. We tried to cut them in some sort of order, but it's very hard because we have blocks of land, you know, and different fields at different heights, all at the right quality, all at 3 leaf, so all ready to cut, just some more and some less. So I have to work with a contractor, and I don't want him driving backwards and forwards all day long between fields. It means we've got the clamp open for longer, we've got guys sitting around, and the contractors get pretty annoyed with that. So we work with them. So we try and cut some of the heavier stuff first, but it's not always the case. We try and do that as much as possible. Up to this year, we've been doing a lot of cutting in the morning, picking up in the afternoon. I think perhaps, I mean, you'll see the silage analysis later, we'd probably, you know, make the silages a little bit too wet doing that. So we gave it more wilting time this year. Unfortunately, it did rain on top of it for a brief spell this year, but and we've changed additive. We hadn't used additive for many years, and I used additive last year, didn't see a great effect, but George and others have pointed out that probably using the wrong one. So we got one predominantly with Lactobacillus plantarum in, so that's more for our kind of grassland, what we grow. If it goes above 28% in dry matter, we need to add a citric acid to it, so it's put our costs up, but I guess weigh that against, you know, a few extra tons of feed in the winter, and it probably soon pay for itself if we manage to get it right. I guess the challenge for us is knowing when it's going to be above or below the limit that we need to put citric acid on, and spend that extra money putting it in. That will be a learning process for me.
So you'd have to do a sample of fresh grass or fresh sward before you decide that, before cutting. Yeah,
I mean, first cut, generally you would assume it would be below that because there's a lot of it and it's been fairly damp. It'll certainly be, well, probably won't be second cut now, but certainly third cut. Anything we cut during the summer, I would assume would be drier than that anyway. But yeah, I need to get the grass into the oven and work that one out, Shirley.
Okay. In terms of your clamping technique, you did mention that you have a longer chop length.
Yeah.
On the
longer chop length to try and get the cows to ruminate on it more. So choose better fats and proteins. That's what we've done for the last few years. Whether that's the right or the wrong thing, I don't want it going straight through them, because they are eating predominantly grass. There's not a lot to hold it up other than grass silage.
And in terms of consolidation in the clamp, how do you find that when you've got herbs in there?
That's fine. I mean, as I said before, I wouldn't put chicory in there. Yeah, it's when it gets too dry, as George pointed out. When we make dry silage, it's always awful. I must learn not to make very dry silage. It's never good. So that they have. We changed the guy on the clamp was different last year. I think he struggled a bit. It looked very nice when he finished, but I think when he was actually filling it, I think he was probably putting layers that were too thick. So I'm hoping they've changed the guy on the clamp this year, and I think that is probably one of the most crucial parts of the whole job. That so much comes down to that one person doing the right thing on the clamp.
And that's applicable whether you've got straight ryegrass swards or yeah, especially with these herbs. George, would you like to just come in there? I think Dan originally said it was a 3 to 4 centimetre chop length for your herbal lays. And George, you mentioned if you go any shorter, you end up with a bit of a mush.
Yeah, I think Dan's taken the right approach with regard to chop length, particularly when we're talking about sort of 5,500–6,000 litre cows. And again, if we're saying that the main points of challenge and waste are coming from the sheer variety of what we've got, then we want to take approaches which even out the situation. So I wouldn't like to see Dan go to a shorter chop length, particularly with some of those herbs in there. We could end up with problems with some of the lower dry matter earlier cuts. It also means that we do need to put in an additive, and I'm glad that Dan has gone down the additive route this year. As Dan said, last year he tried an additive, didn't really see much impact. I felt that the additive that Dan used last year had a sort of a heterofermentative approach, so we're getting different types of fermentation. And we wanted to see him take a more simple approach, which was, as he says, to use something with Lactobacillus plantarum in, which is a homofermentator, to give a more even fermentation, simple fermentation. I would like Dan to use the citric acid a bit more often, but I appreciate the expense. But from my point of view, the whole approach here is that it might feel costly to go down an additive route, but in this situation, the objective is to even out quality. And if we can do that, even to a small degree, I feel that Dan will be saving so much more than the cost of the additive on his feed bill. And that's really the proof of the pudding. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Dan can save costs on these relatively very high costing feeds that he's bringing in, that he was mentioning earlier on. That's going to be the proof of the pudding.
We're going to have to do like full cost benefit analysis. Could we just clarify the difference between the homo and the heterofermentative bacteria? What's the aim of inoculant in a silage clamp?
Well, what we're trying to do is to get the right bugs as quickly as possible to reduce the pH and provide a stable situation. The heterofermenters have different, if you like, if we put it, different types of fermentation, and that can overcomplicate the situation. I don't want to knock them particularly, but in Dan's situation, and in most situations, from my point of view, actually the homo fermenters where they're producing just one type of fermentation, which is lactic acid based, will produce a more even and stable fermentation situation. The citric acid in Dan's case is not really about that fermentation. The citric acid is about the stability of the material once the clamp is opened up, and guarding against yeast coming in and heating the silage up and losing quality and material through molding, basically.
Okay, we've got a question in self-feed. Could you have a fibrous grass crop as a layer in the clamp?
The problem with if you have a very long stalky stuff, you get poor consolidation. So we've had that. Sometimes you get bits that they haven't chopped properly, and the cows never eat it because of that.
Any thoughts on fodder beet? Have you tried that?
No, I don't really know how it would fit in with our system. We don't have a wagon or feed troughs. It gets points out a fair bit. A lot of people think it's like the sort of the crop that organic farmers should be growing, but I also see how it ruins, a bit like maize. I'm not, not a big fan of maize because of what it does to soils, and I know that's improving with time, and sugar beet would be of a similar ilk. So I just don't think it fits in with our feed system, unfortunately.
Okay. There was a question about grazing the herbal lays. You've got a challenge of dry matter allocations for the cows. So is this something that you're doing with your software? Otherwise, how do you do it?
A bit of software, but I think a lot of it is experience. So we've moved. So we were growing Cotswold herbal lays for 6 years, but we find they're very open, and there's less grass in there than you expect. Last year we grew, and this is not an advert for anyone particular, we used Western seeds. There's more grass in there now, and it feels a bit more like a conventional lay with more herbs in there, and we've found it easier to allocate on that, and we're trying from a different company again this year as well, so we're playing around with it, but a lot of it is down to experience, knowing what each paddock will do. Eyeballing is always, I always say to the guys, just eyeball it as well. And
walking through it and looking at it. It's not just
and when they've
from the tractor cab.
They under allocated the last time, they'll know for the next time round.
Yeah, okay, that's good, thank you. George, would you like to touch on the nutrients? We were talking about sulfur and...
In terms of the soils, yeah. So we have some low potassiums across the farm. That, in terms of solutions, then Dan is talking about composting the manure that we saw in the picture, Shirley, and I think that would get over a couple of issues that are a challenge. Obviously, there's a challenge with the breakdown, as Dan says, of the material that he's currently got, and if we can compost it, that breakdown should be more rapid. It'll add to the health of his soils as well if he's able to compost that material, and it will start to resolve that low potassium issue that he has. And potassium is very important in the whole nitrogen uptake and grass growth story. So another thing to note is that the way that Dan, if I may say so, Dan approaches the organic way of producing milk is that Dan doesn't want to bring in things in bags basically onto the farm. So that gives us some restriction in solving both the potassium and also, I mentioned the sulfur issue as well. So moving on to the sulfur is very important for protein production and herbage growth, particularly when we've got these diverse lays and we've got legumes in there as well. So it was evident walking across some of the fields that from my point of view, there are some sulfur deficiencies, looking particularly at some of the recent reseeds as well. So we discussed ways of getting more sulfur into the nutrition at the sward level. And there are options that we could use. There's elemental sulfur, that's a long-term solution. There's kieserite, which is potassium sulfate, which would be good from both potassium and the sulfur point of view, but that would involve bringing lots of bags onto the farm. We're not going to go down that route. There's other solutions around sort of polysulfate, but that's got other nutrients in it that perhaps is a bit of a waste. Dan doesn't particularly need those in terms of magnesium, for example. And we kind of have landed on an approach where Dan's going to take a look at bringing gypsum into the farm, which is 6% sulfate, and that would have a large positive impact on soil fertility. It could also have a positive impact on soil structural health as well, and that would bring hopefully significant benefits to the forage growth part of the forage process.
That's not just for an organic farm, though, is it? What about conventional forage production?
No, you could bring gypsum in to have those benefits within the conventional situation as well. That's not an issue. But to summarise, then it's potassium and sulphur that Dan needs to address, and we've got two ways of doing that. One is the composting, and the other one is the potential to bring in gypsum. Okay,
so Dan, what are you going to do?
Just as George said, I mean, I think we'll also take. We need to look at doing some leaf samples as well to see what actually the plant's taking up. So I think we'd try and do that a bit this year. We didn't talk about that too much with George, but it's something I'm keen on doing, because obviously that's from the growing crop, and that'll tell us quite a lot. But yeah, I'm keen to. I mean, it's something we've been thinking about for quite a long time now. So I think George pushed me over the edge.
Oh.
In the nicest possible way.
Just tell us how you're going to do the composting.
Well, that's to be decided. I think we're in two minds. We either do it aerobically or anaerobically. So aerobically is by turning it. Currently trying to do it with a telehandler is laborious and therefore doesn't get done, or we don't do enough of it. We could look at windrow machines, getting funding for that, or buying ourselves. But we're going to burn off a lot of nitrogen doing that. We're still going to burn a lot of diesel doing that. So I'm not sure that's 100% the right way. You can do it anaerobically by bokashi, so adding microbes to it and possibly some clay and some other bits and pieces, and covering it and letting it rot down. We tried doing that in our lagoon a couple of years ago by putting microbes in the lagoon, but didn't really see any extra breakdown of the straw. Then does that mean it didn't work or wouldn't work in the future? I don't know. But obviously it's whether we can take a product which has been sat around outside for several months and then start to ferment it, is whether it's gone beyond the point. So we're going to work on that over the next few months.
So it's a big thing, because there was a question referring to this, because if you're able to compost a solid material, it's better, isn't it, than having the slurry? And we've got storage issues, haven't we, with the tighter regulations?
Yeah, I mean, we've done it in small scales in the past, and we can make wood chip on the farm, so we can mix it with excuse me, fresh wood chip, and we know if we turn that regularly or heat up and break down, and it makes some really lovely composts. But we've probably trailered out something like 100 trailers or 150 trailers worth of muck. So to try and do that over that scale is colossal. So that's why the bokashi would be better, static pile. But again, it's going to take, we're going to have to experiment. If I try and do the whole lot at once, it's going to be big. But it's the biggest part of our system that we need to make some changes on.
And just tell everybody, how much would a windrowing machine cost?
I think they're about 50,000.
Plus then there's, as you mentioned, the running costs. Yeah. Okay. And in terms of when are you putting the gypsum on?
Well, that would be in the autumn, probably after our last cut, I would think, George.
Yeah, I think so. And you will lose some of that sulphur leaching out through the soil profile over winter, but there'll still be enough there to give you an impact in Dan's situation anyway, at the beginning of the next year. And then you're not interrupting growth. And any sort of spring operations that Dan is doing with regard to reseeding, we could put gypsum in there and incorporate it into the soil. But I wouldn't like Dan to be covering a large area of land of standing swards with gypsum in the spring. So it's an autumn job. Just to pick up on the composting thing as well, looking at Dan's soil organic matters, they're sort of between 4.5, 6, something like that. Measuring soil organic matter can be a challenge in terms of accuracy, but if we take those lab analyses as read, then there's some space there within Dan's soil type to grow organic matters, which is only going to help him in the medium to long term. So the composting should help with that situation and building those organic matters up within the soil at the soil level more quickly and with more impact, positive impact on the forage system.
What's the benefit of a better organic matter?
Well,
Several
it's getting
benefits.
back to what Dan said. He wants the organic matter to be, the more organic matter we can build, we can get those up to sort of, on average across the farm, sort of 6.5, 7, even 7.5 and higher. That will make the whole system in terms of nutrient turnover more efficient, and Dan will actually see the benefit of what he wants to get to. And he's talking about soils at the beginning of the session, Shirley, in terms of actually getting more nutrients out of this the soil profile, what's in there, without putting any more in. So it'll have the whole nutrient cycle work more efficiently within the soil, and Dan will pick up more of those nutrients in his forage production process.
Yeah. And I think we hold water better in the soil. Yeah,
absolutely. Really wet conditions is not perhaps a problem for Dan in Sussex, but if we have people who are attending who are in wet areas, then the more organic matter we have in the soil, then it tends to be that the longer we can graze on the shoulders of the season, for example, because we're holding soil, we're holding water in the soil rather than the water sitting on soil, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. And what about links to carbon sequestration with organic matter?
Yeah, I mean, the more organic matter we grow, the more carbon logically we're sequestering. Ironically, composting does lose organic matter out of the manure material. We can lose up to half of the carbon out of our manure through composting, but what is left is more impactful more quickly on organic matter within the soil. So as with everything, there's balance. It's a balance and compromise, but it will grow organic matter and therefore carbon more quickly in down soils if he goes down the composting route.
Just going to share.
Shirley, can I just, the organic matter bit, I mean, the figures were really disappointing on our latest soil analysis, and it's a bit like the silage analysis. Like, I reckon we're 2% down on soil organic matter from our last lot that we did 5 years ago. And I find it incredibly unlikely we burned through 2% of soil organic matter. The farm's actually more productive now than it was probably back then. I don't really understand why that was, but it's quite frustrating, to see that. And we saw that on the other farm as well. And so, yeah, I'm in sort of, I'm struggling with that level, and for me, I was really disappointed with that, and I don't understand why that's happened and what that's actually telling me about what's going on in our soils. Yeah, just as an aside.
Yeah, it's an important insight. It's impossible that Dan has lost 2% organic matter across the farm out of his soils in a few years. I mean, that's just not possible, even if he ploughed the whole thing every year. So this gets down to the accuracy of measurement at the field level, not so much in the lab, but it's really the variation in organic matter we can get, particularly in livestock systems across fields, means that we could happen to 1 year do a soil analysis which picks up on areas in a field that have got a lot of organic matter, and then we do the same field 2 years later and there's areas that aren't there. And I have seen examples from dairy farms where organic matter has ranged over a 2-year period in one field between sort of 6.5 and 13% organic matter, which is just impossible. And that's really down to sampling technique. And so we can't do the classic W random pattern across the field that we normally do with a soil analysis and actually use that for organic matter. Because of the variation, we need to start to think about how we sample fields specifically for organic matter and nothing else. And that involves actually picking areas in the field which are representative and going back to those exact same areas in future years. And that will give us a better idea of how organic matter is changing. So we have to have a different mindset for sampling soils for organic matter than we do for sampling them for basic nutrients.
And again, it sounds like as technology develops, that may become an easier job in future. We're just in the last 5-10 minutes of our talk today. So George, I think we ought to make use of these I'm just going to try, there we go, want to move on. Yeah, can you just talk us through these pictures just to take us back to forage quality?
Yeah, we'll move through these quickly now as time is running on, but this is just to show some of the sort of structure of Dan's soils and the variety in swards and in standing crops. So this is an autumn reseed from last year, as Dan mentioned earlier on, with some productive grasses in it, but also with herbs and red and white clover. A good standing crop around about 5.5 tons. If you can move on to the next one, Shirley, please. This is a field which is right next door to the one that you've already seen. It's about 3 or 4 years old, Dan, I think. Predominantly grass, red and white clover. There's still quite a bit of red clover in this one, which shows that Dan's cutting height is kind on his red clover, as it should be. But again, we've only got about 3 tons in this one, so it shows you the sort of sheer variety in standing crop that Dan's trying to deal with. And then we get into the conversation that we've had about when do you cut, how much wilting time do you give to each one? Can the contractor handle that variety? And that's very, very difficult. And then when we're talking about reducing losses from that, because we've got this variety and maintaining quality, and that's why, and I hope people on the call will appreciate why we've gone down an additive route. Go to the next one, please, Shirley. So this is one of the cutting fields in a different part of the farm now. This soil profile's got a bit more sand in it and less silt in it, and we've got about a 4-ton crop there. Next one, please, Shirley. And this is one which has got more plantain in it, more herbal lane. You've heard what Dan's approach is to plantain as opposed to chicory. Absolutely agree with what he is saying. But again, if you look, just think about the 4 different situations you've just seen, you can see the variety that Dan is dealing with in terms of species and in terms of standing crop. I think the next slide. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, silage analysis. Yeah.
So yeah, this is the silage analysis from last year for the 3 cuts, and some for the barley oats vetch mix and the oats and vetch whole crop. So you can see there we've got a bit of variety in pHs, so we've got different fermentations and preservation going on. The energy contents, well, hopefully the approach to additives that Dan is now taking will up those a bit. We should lose less of the digestible dry matter, if I can put it like that, through the approach that Dan is now taking. Just to highlight some of the crude proteins, hopefully they will improve as well in the grass silage. But if you look at the barley oats vetch and oats vetch whole crop, you can actually see that Dan's approach to producing more homegrown protein can actually work. There is an issue around whether the cows would like to eat it, and so we've got higher crude proteins where we've got more legumes in the forage, and in terms of digestible undegradable protein, or the proteins that are bypassed and therefore more useful in terms of production, the analysis is showing that we can up those a bit as well. And obviously we have a variety of ammonia N levels as well, which is indicative of different types of sward that we're cutting and different types of fermentation in the clamps. So again, these numbers really show the variety that Dan is dealing with, and we're trying to maintain the useful D-value, the useful protein, and to even out the fermentation so that he can feed more of this and less of the brought in cake. I think we also need to put a caveat on these numbers in that when you send a silage analysis away to a lab, the calibrations they use are basically on perennial ryegrass and perennial ryegrass white clover. Dan's got a lot of red clover on the farm and a lot of different species. And Dan already does this. When he looks at these analyses, he looks at them with a pinch of salt, because actually there's no lab anywhere that can accurately tell you exactly what the energy and protein content is within a herbal lay.
how would these silage qualities differ on a conventional farm that would be putting bag fertiliser on, George?
We would possibly see a little bit more crude protein in the grass ones, but that protein would be represented by free nitrogen rather than actual amino acid based proteins. The MEs are really more about cutting date than anything else, and the dry matters are really more about wilting than anything else. So on a conventional farm, we would see perhaps differences, Shirley, in the protein values more than anything else, and we wouldn't see such variety in the ammonia N levels either.
Dan, we just have a couple of quick questions. Do you prefer a spring or autumn establishment for reseed, and what do you do about weeds? Because we're talking herbs, but there are weeds out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, autumn is more of a banker. We've tried, well, we have done direct reseeds in the spring and epic failures. I mean, it now seems pretty consistent that April is very, very dry now. So it's really high risk. Actually, we should probably be reseeding in May, judging by the current weather. But yeah, but at autumn, we made a hash of it last year by over cultivating and losing a lot of moisture. So that's why we're looking at the direct drilling. But yeah, autumn, you've got longer, you've got a bigger window to get it right.
And if you do get a dry year, how do you make sure that your growth is keeping up with demand? What's your strategy?
Dry cows off, sell stock. Okay. Yeah, feed hay, like have a longer dry period. I think my dad always told me, like you just let the cows do their thing. If you haven't got the grass there, they'll just dry themselves off naturally. Is not to stress about it too much. I mean, that's why we're autumn calving. Clearly, spring calving down here would be more of a challenge, and we would be feeding silage through that period to buffer. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. George, a final point or two to put home to people?
No, I think the final point for me, Shelley, would be that when we're looking at the forage process and we're looking at wastage points, it's very, very different, and it's very circumstantial, depending on the system you have, the way you're trying to operate it, the soils you have, and the types of lays that you're growing. So I would encourage people not to take the approach to completely change what they're doing, but to use it to reduce waste in the system, accentuate the value, and actually improve what you're doing. The approach that we're taking with lean management doesn't tell you how to farm, or it doesn't say that you need to change your own personality. It just hopefully will bring improvements in what you want to do and how you want to do it.
Thank you. Thanks both. I'd just like to point out to everybody that there's plenty of AHDB resources out there, from detailed research and practical information on soils over to our Forage for Knowledge pages. There's a forage cost calculator. All these kind of links we'll send to you on email afterwards. And upcoming events, we have actually got on-farm events going on now. 8th of June, if you're in the Carmarthenshire area. We've got slurry opportunities to replace fertiliser. On the 9th of June, we've got an autumn block calving fertility review. You're welcome to come over to Leicestershire. And another webinar on the 9th about risk management. So all of these details are available on our website. If you're not automatically on the mailing list, please log on here and fill out our keeping in touch form. So I'd just like to thank you all very much for your questions today. It's been really good and in depth, and thank you for your time and joining in and your attention, and we'll say goodbye for now.
Goodbye, thanks very much.